Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Today, the first witness in the 1984 genocide trial against former Congress MP Jagdish Tytla gives her harrowing account of what happened to her husband during that terrible time. More on that in a moment. We often talk about the Punjabi language. Well, today we're going to take a deeper dive into how and why it's facing its decline. The Florida hurricane is about to break all records as it batters the US, and in India, as China flexes its muscles, reports are that Modi has weakened India's air force to its lowest level in 60 years. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers. Don't forget to let us know where you're logging in from, because we'd love to share a shout out to all of our viewers around the world.
Indeed we do. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we'll be taking a look at lots of your great comments, which have been filling up below our videos. So thank you for those as always. Right, James, let's get things underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
Let's take a look at the Indian Air Force. It appears that Modi has crashed the force. Essentially what's happening is that they are at record lows in terms of their abilities and preparedness to actually take part in any type of Air Force activity. With that, it's the lowest numbers of combat readiness since before 1965. So you're looking back at a time back before even the Pakistan-India war. And it's just amazing to see in this day and age that they are allowing the Air Force to be dwindling in such record numbers. And this has come out from the India Air Force saying that they are only operating with 31 squadrons. And this is a record low. Back in 1990s, they were up to about 41 or within that area of comfort. But since then, again, they've gone fleetingly down. Now, as you can see in this article here that actually was released by this one here, this was the Business Standard. I had to remind myself because I've been researching a lot of different articles here. And they are, again, just confirming those numbers and talking about it being the sanctioned strength, which is 42 squadrons. So they are well below what they're sanctioned for and what they need, especially in this day and age where Pakistan is just really going to town on boosting their numbers and their readiness, not to mention the implementation of new technologies that come with all of these newer air fighters that are being brought into Pakistan, China, and other areas. I mean, it's a very volatile world right now, especially around India. And for them to have let go on their Air Force capabilities is just unheard of. It's, something that's been going on for decades. It's not something that's only happened under Modi, but it has been something that Modi and his government has failed to act upon and has only gotten worse. So it's time that they take the bull by the horns and start replenishing. Now, it's not as simple as just ordering new aircraft and getting them in. It's about the new technology. It's about implementation. It's about training the pilots and the other staff that are going to be required to operate and work on and service these new planes and this new technology. So it is not just an overnight fix. It is something that's going to take a very long time. Now, of course, India wants to have the majority of this done in-house, so in India, and that is just not realistic. So they are looking to outsource some of the requirements, and that's just incredible because with the partners that they're looking at, the volatility of them turning the technology against India is just astronomical. And also the fact that even if they're purchasing from another government or another country, of course that technology is going to be reduced. They aren't going to give them the full capabilities in which they have to fight their own defenses or offensive should it ever happen. So again, it's so important that India catch up on the technology, on the training, on the staffing, and of course on the aircraft themselves. So this again is a direct impact on national security. it is a direct impact on their ability to fight and defend. So it's pretty interesting to see this report come out, Angus. And with that, of course, the India Air Force is also making news with an event that happened in Chennai with 5 dead and 12 people, 12 lakh people turning up, which is 1.2 million. At an air show. And we'll discuss that tomorrow night. I'll bring a story on that. But it just seems bad news all over for the Indian Air Force, Angus.
I think that this is a really concerning story, actually, not just for India, but actually for the West, because when we talk about the geopolitics of that region on a regular basis, a weak India is no favour for the West, because, of course, the West are trying very hard to bring India on side as a potential ally against, as we keep saying, a burgeoning China. China is growing, China is ambitious, it is aspirational, and clearly there is at least one catalytic event to escalate things, and that is Taiwan. Now, Taiwan's an awfully long way away, but people don't realise that in many cases that China has its eyes on Taiwan. It wants Taiwan. It's made no secret about the fact that one day it will take Taiwan, and it will do it by force if necessary. And of course, the West has said, you try that, then we won't tolerate that. In other words, this is a potential catalytic event that could kick off things to a very large scale. Basically, I'm talking about a world war. Now, as we lead up to, God forbid, that awful event, and of course everything will be done to avoid that, but if that does happen, then of course the regional allies will become very important, and India in that region is one of the potentially most powerful allies in that region. That's why the West are courting India so significantly. But India at the moment is appearing to be a weak ally. What baffles me, India has a hugely successful space program. It's invested billions of dollars into its space program. It's achieved some incredible things. It's landed on the south pole of the moon. It's got missions to Mars, the sun, etc., etc. So it's got this incredible space program. But at the same time, it has neglected its armed forces. And now we see that its air force is the weakest it's been in nearly 60 odd years, at a time just when China is doing exactly the opposite. China is pouring billions into its armed forces. Its armed forces are becoming better equipped, better resourced, better trained, etc., just over its northern border. So what is India playing at? Likewise, we have Pakistan on its western borders, likewise bolstering its armed forces, again, who are likely to ally with China. So once again, India is finding itself surrounded by increasingly powerful neighbours. Likewise, in the Indian Ocean, we now see China's strategic philosophy has been to encircle India around the Indian Ocean. It's now got military bases or naval bases established in Sri Lanka, and right across several islands across the Indian Ocean. Now we see the British stupidly committing one of the most heinous acts of self-destruction, handing over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, which in itself is inexplicable. But basically the Chagos Islands, again, another potential base for China, because of course Mauritius is now aligned with China. So again, another base that China has encircling India. So India is going to find itself, if it doesn't, certainly if it finds itself coming to blows with China, it's in a very, very weak position, strategically speaking, and geographically speaking, and now militarily speaking. How can India defend itself if its air force is in such a dire state? Now, the other problem here, of course, is it takes years to change things around. It's like turning a supertanker. If you want to change course, it takes years before that takes effect. If you need to upgrade your air force, if you need to upgrade any of your military assets, it literally takes years and sometimes even decades, depending on what it is. So even if India changes course now and starts investing billions into its air force, it's probably going to be 5 to 10 years before that effect actually sees any benefit. So Narendra Modi needs to pull his finger out and starts waking up and starts actually prioritising its resources, because certainly it's not in the West's interest, and the West, I'm sure, will be raising some very concerned eyebrows about this. We do know that all sorts of military deals have been, certainly in the planning and possibly even the signing between the US and India. Let's hope that is leading to an improved situation. But I have no doubt that both the US, the UK, Canada and the Five Eyes nations will be quietly pressuring India, saying, look, you need to change course on this. You need to do something, and you need to bolster your armed forces, because at the moment you're going in the wrong direction, and if things do kick off one day with China, you're going to be on the back foot. India has been complacent. It's a lesson learned that the UK learnt back in the 1930s when World War II kicked off, is that during the 1930s the UK had taken its foot off the pedal in a big way. Its armed forces were in a terrible state. And as it turned out, ironically, without getting too much down into history, we managed to buy an extra year by Neville Chamberlain saying peace in our time. In fact, there is a belief that he just basically bought the UK an extra year to suddenly start pouring resources into building its military forces ready to take on Germany. Well, India's falling into that same trap. India is getting complacent. Its armed forces are weakening at a time when, in fact, it should be bolstering them. So, James, I find this a very concerning story.
Absolutely. And excuse me, that's one thing I'll say about Donald Trump when he called on NATO during his last presidential term, is that he called on NATO nations because they weren't putting in their fair share to the program, which of course has a lot to do with international defense, as well as defensive protections for all of the nations that are party to that. So the allied nations really need to pick up their funding and get to those targets a lot sooner than what they would like.
Indeed, and I think one other point worth bringing up as well is Modi's had this policy, this philosophy of self-sufficiency for India. He's operated a very protectionist philosophy over India, basically disincentivizing foreign firms, basically kicking foreign investors out of India, and trying to home grow industry and everything. Now that in itself is a very laudable aim. But certainly militarily, if he's looking to look at third parties supplying components and logistics and whatever it happens to be, again, as you rightly said, James, not a very good strategic decision, because ultimately you're not going to end up with the best possible military assets. But secondly, India is a big enough nation and has a big enough economy to be self-sufficient militarily. It can buy in the technology, it can buy in the expertise, but it can certainly develop it and manufacture it locally, and that is what it should be doing. And yet we don't see any evidence of this in Narendra Modi's India. Why not? He's doing it in every other element. Why is he not doing it militarily? Who knows, James? A strange one.
That's true. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and see what direction they tend to move in or start to move in, hopefully very quickly. But as we both agree that it's going to be a long process, Angus. But with that, we'll move on to the next story. And of course, the biggest storm in the world that has happened this year is about to hit down on Wednesday. They're anticipating late afternoon that it hits the Tampa Bay area. And of course, we're talking about Hurricane Milton. Now, this comes on the heels of the recent Hurricane Helene, and she hit down in the hardest hit seems to be Northern Carolina. And I've actually been in contact with a small business owner there. He has 60 full-time employees. His facilities, where they are a print-on-demand company, so they do everything from canvas prints to mugs to marketing materials. And they are known as canvasprints.com, and they have been completely devastated and wiped out from this storm. And they're looking at millions of dollars in damage done to the warehouse. I mean, we'll look at in a future article or a future story, we'll be actually talking with Mr. Lake, who is the founder and CEO. And we'll take a look closer at the damage directly to that company and just show the devastation and the power of the water and what it's done. I mean, you're talking about, 5-ton pieces of equipment that just seem to be, just completely decimated by water. The water levels that were so powerful, they just picked up a tractor trailer and pushed it across the parking lot right into the building. I mean, you can see from the photos in this article here that was put out by the University of Northern Carolina. And you can see the devastation of these towns, and this doesn't even show the most or the worst of it. Now, this is the imagery of Tropical Storm Helene, and this is over the Carolinas from September the 27th, and they're still doing a search and rescue at this point, where there are still many areas of the counties that are completely blocked off from services. They are completely blocked off from rescue teams and completely blocked off from emergency resources, whether that's food, water, and so forth. So they've had to airlift into some of these areas, and others are still cut off completely. The death toll from this hurricane and this tropical storm has hit just under 200 thus far, but I'm expecting those numbers to go up as they continue to locate bodies and to just sort through the devastation that's been caused. Now, here we're looking at a chart of the rain levels in inches in some of the surrounding counties in Ashdale, North Carolina. In that region, it just shows, like, I mean, here's one, Busick Ross. That one there is, you're looking at 31.33 inches. I'm Canadian, so I keep wanting to refer to centimeters. But you can see the numbers are just astronomical, and you think about that in one spot, but when it actually hit in the mountains, so you have all of that millions of gallons of water that are running down the mountains and into the towns and into the buildings. So although you're looking at, it may say, you know, for example, Marion County here at 12.77 inches, that's over a foot of water, but you also have to look that when the surges hit in the shorelines, that you can kind of predict a bit better than what you can here, because this was unforeseen at the level that it was at. So some of the areas we're seeing water levels at over 10 to 15 feet high. And it's actually, just catastrophic that you can see here. The roads have been wiped out, bridges wiped out. There's actually areas of the county that used to stand and along these shores here, for example, I mean, this has wiped out several homes. We're actually standing along the roadside here. You can't really see on the left of the image or down this area that down at the end of the photo, but again, it's just wiped out whole parts of land. So with that, of course, come the conspiracies and all of the misinformation online, which is really not helping anybody at this time. And misinformation such as the fact that one of the stories going around out there is that the residents are getting $750 from FEMA, and that's all they will get, and yet the government is spending all of this money on Ukraine and other areas, but that's actually not the truth whatsoever. They will be getting a lot more than that for the individuals impacted by the storm. So if you see that $750 story going around, ignore it. It's not factual. It is just people stirring up and trying to use this as a political weapon. So again, there's other stories such as the government just taking control of people's private land and taking possession. That again is not happening. It's just rumors out there. Some land, as I said, has been completely wiped out. Whole sections of counties have been wiped out by rivers and massive flooding. So the land isn't even there anymore. The topography has totally changed. And at that point, of course, people won't be able to rebuild there because the land doesn't exist anymore. And they will find alternatives and try to get through this. You can see another image here where you can see, buildings just completely covered, even as you look up the shoreline, but look at in the water, you can see the roof of that one building. I mean, it's just devastating, the lives that are lost, the tens of thousands of homes that have been destroyed, the thousands of businesses. And at the end of the day, they're anticipating in the tens of billions of dollars of property damage that's been caused by this storm. Now, as I said, Florida is about to see touchdown on Wednesday of Hurricane Milton. And this is, at this time, a Category 5 hurricane with winds gusting up to 180 miles per hour. That's miles per hour. And they anticipate overnight tonight, those numbers could get as high as 185 miles per hour. Now, when the storm or the hurricane touches down, they do expect that it falls to a Category 4 or 3, but there still will be wind gusts over 200 miles per hour with the hurricane winds dropping hopefully into the 170, 160 mile per hour range, but still a devastating storm and hurricane that is going to be the worst to hit the Tampa Bay area since 1922. So over 100 years ago since the storm of this magnitude has hit in that region. So it's going to be another devastating storm. The bright side, if there is one to this story, is that they do have several days notice when it comes to the Tampa Bay area, unlike Northern Carolina and that region. At least there is time to evacuate, and all of the emergency workers are at this time trying to get people evacuated as quickly as possible, but safely. They have removed all of the tolls off of the highways and bridges and just trying to really encourage people to leave and get to safe areas. Now, they cannot legally force people from their homes, but they can strongly recommend it. And some of the emergency personnel in the press conference are actually going as far to really make people realize how deadly and disastrous this is by telling them to take a permanent marker and write their names on their arms and their legs so that the rescue workers can identify their bodies when they're found afterwards. So, I mean, that's some pretty harsh words to be sharing with people in light of a storm, to really put the importance of evacuation in their heads. So it's, just amazing. And I'm just going to go to two quick animations here, Angus, or two quick videos, sorry. One's an animation and the other is an actual flight by the National Oceanic and the organization that monitors all of this, the NOAA. And the first one I'm going to share is an animation of a probe being dropped into a hurricane. And this is one of the ways that they do research and development to find out the strength, the patterns, and other crucial information about the structure of hurricanes, the winds, the power, all of these different important things that are so crucial to understanding the patterns and the destruction. So this one here I'll play quickly, and then we'll move on to the next, which is also another quick video. So again, I guess that just kind of showed the how they drop, just a quick animation to see how they follow the patterns once they drop those sensors into the eye of the storm from above, and how it moves and just gives that information. So it's kind of a quick raw animation, but it gives you ideas to how they drop those sensors and how they follow the pattern. The next one I'm going to show you is actually, once again, from the NOAA, and this one is actually flying over the eye of Hurricane Helen. That was actually filmed on September the 25th, just prior to it hitting the shores and hitting areas including Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and the likes. But as I said, the worst damage seems to be in Northern Carolina, but the tragic results of these just show us and remind us the power of Mother Nature and the power of water that you just don't think about every day when you're, running the bath or, getting a drink of water. So. So again, when you're flying above, I mean, it looks very calm. It looks like your traditional clouds gathering above, but you see that big vacancy in the cloud base, and that's where the force is pulling a lot down and circulating winds. But again, when you fly above them, they don't look that dangerous and that treacherous. But of course, we've seen what the devastation is on the other end. And some people think that it's a big funnel that actually sucks everything up into the orbit, and they would expect to see Mama's couch flying out the top towards the airplane, but that's not actually how it works. But again, our thoughts are with all of the victims of Hurricane Helene and Milton. We are thinking of you. There are many ways to protect yourself when going back into your home. If you are a victim of these floods and floods in any event, just keep in mind that there could be pockets of gas in your home still from utilities that have been damaged. You could have water levels, so when you're stepping through the water, you may not expect that half the stuff of your house has been shifted. It's in the water. You could be stepping on knives, on broken glass, anything, because you can't see through the water. It's so murky and dirty. So keep in mind that there are a lot of risks involved in going back into your home. So be very cautious, be very careful, and for as much as I can implore you, keep children, young children, people with respiratory or other illnesses away, pregnant women, because with the airborne particulates, just like in a fire, the floods or whatever, there are a lot of bacteria and other particulates that can be in the air that can be especially harmful to people that are more at risk. So please use caution, and just remember that Angus and I, our thoughts are with you all.
Indeed. Yeah, it's quite a big storm, to put it mildly, just about to hit Florida. And well,
Yeah.
we wish them the very best of luck in facing it. We'll obviously keep an eye on this, but it does, of course, those who have experienced northwestern India will be very familiar with the devastation that the monsoon certainly can wreak. These floods,
Yeah,
the
that's right.
power of the floods is just almost unimaginable if you've never even seen it or even seen it on video. And certainly northwestern India has suffered for years with these monsoon floods, and of course mismanagement by local regional councils. And the contrast here, I'm mentioning this because of course the interesting contrast will be how the respective governments deal with this sort of devastation. And that we criticise a lot the Indian government, and it's been the subject of a lot of criticism, certainly for what's happened in the foothills of the Himalayas. Across Himachal Pradesh and the northern Punjab and places like that, where there have been some dreadful, devastating floods and damages and so many lives lost. And of course the Sikhs have been there in force on a regular basis, dishing out their charity and helping those suffering. And likewise, I've no doubt that they will be out there in Florida dishing out help and assistance where it's needed. But as I say, the contrast will be how will the US government deal with this compared to how the Indian government deals with it. The Indian government have been, as I say, criticised regularly for their lack of not just awareness, but their just lack of care almost in terms of what those who've been suffering in northwest India. The US government, I remember years back, it was Hurricane Katrina that devastated Louisiana and eastern Texas. There was even years afterwards that the government criticised for neglecting the whole communities that suffered dreadfully under the hurricanes that hit that year. So yeah, well, we'll keep an eye on this one, James. It's but there are a lot of nervous people across the Florida region at the moment.
Yeah, and as I said, the only bright side to it is that they have the ability to evacuate ahead of time, that they're getting enough notice, unlike other areas that have been just decimated by such storms and hurricanes in the past. So,
Indeed. Okay, well let's move on. Let's change the subject in a big way now. Let's go back to India. And my first story is covering. We talked about a week or two ago the trial of Jagdish Taitla. And these two Sikh ladies who finally, after many years of huge efforts, tied up with a barrister and a legal counsel to bring Jagdish Taitla to justice after so many years, and his involvement in the genocide, the terrible genocide that occurred in November 1984. And of course, we do know that many Congress MPs, many people tied up with the Congress party during that dreadful time after the assassination of Indira Gandhi, and that assassination was in turn after her appalling outrage of attacking the Ahmadiyya Sahib in June that year. Well, the genocide that followed saw not just the deaths, but the awful torture, the rape, the murder, and the killings in complete cold blood, and the most outrageous, inhuman acts against the Sikh population in not just in Delhi, but actually other regions as well. And the stories that came out from that time were just almost unrepeatable. The horror. In fact, it's doing animals a disservice to say it was animalistic behaviour. It was genocidal actions that just did not belong in any normal level of humanity. And of course, this trial is now starting to hear some of these actions. And one of the ladies that finally has brought this guy Tytler to justice, she's been in the witness stand, and she's started recounting what she witnessed during those times. And it was the Times, the report I've taken for this one, there's obviously reported across many outlets, but the Times of India has reported, has taken quite a close eye on this case. And they said, and they quoted Lakvinder Kaur, she's one of the two Kaurs who brought Tytler to justice. She said, "The day when my world was destroyed came before my eyes." Now, she is the widow of the late Badal Singh, who was killed on November the 1st, 1984. So it's actually one of the first days of the genocide in those anti-Sikh riots at the Gurdwara Pul Bangash. Now, she broke down in tears when she was in the witness stand, deposing against former Union Minister and Congress functionary Jagdish Tytler. She was the first witness to be examined in the case, so there's no doubt over the coming days there's going to be an awful lot of awful stories coming out. Kaur told the court that Tytler had come to the Gurdwara Pul Bangash in a vehicle and incited a mob to attack Sikh people. "Kill the Sikhs, destroy them, set the Gurdwara on fire," Tytler said. That's what Kaur said in court. And she was recording a statement before the special judge Vishal Gogni in a case related to the killing of 3 people in the riots. And one of them, of course, was her husband, Badal Singh. And 3 people, Sardar Thakur Singh, Badal Singh and Gurcharan Singh, were each killed on November the 1st in 1984 in this dreadful targeted mob violence against Sikhs that followed that assassination of Indira Gandhi. A person called Surinder Singh, after recognising her as the wife of Badal Singh, told her what had happened to her husband on the fateful day. So he actually found Badal Singh's wife and told her what actually happened. And Ms. Kaur said, "He told me that he had seen my husband exiting the Gurdwara and being attacked by the mob, which took away his kirpan and stabbed him to death. Singh told me that the mob engaged in violence, and after killing my husband, his body was placed on a cart and was burned by placing burning tyres on top of him." And of course, this reflects many other eyewitness accounts of what happened. And burning tyres feature an awful lot in these stories that came back from this genocide. Right. There are many reports of men and even women and even children being encircled by these Hindu mobs. And these tyres were put round their bodies. They were basically trapped, encased in tyres and then set alight. So of course they couldn't escape, and they basically burnt to death, screaming, quite often in front of their children, in front of their families outside their homes. So it's just absolutely inhuman what happened. Kaur said that after learning of the circumstances of her husband's murder, she approached her counsel, who moved on application in the Karkaduma courts for an investigation into the incident. She told the court that her husband had dropped her at his village, Panthipura, in Muzaffarnagar, about 2 days before, and then returned to Delhi. Then, upon learning about the murder, about 5 days after his death, she came to Delhi with her father-in-law, and she said, "My elder daughter was 10 months old. My younger daughter was born after the demise of my husband in 1985. Now, subsequent to this is an interesting insight into actually the aftermath of what happened after the genocide. She was provided a DDA flat in Tilak Vihar in 1985 and received 7 lakh rupees in instalments as compensation from the government. She said she was also provided a job as a peon at Tagore Garden in a government senior secondary school. Now this is interesting because it actually does reflect. I mean, at first glance it says, okay, well the government at least had tried to help the families of victims of the genocide. But what it actually really means is when you do this, essentially you're accepting guilt. You're accepting, firstly, that the genocide occurred, and secondly, that the government actually had a part in that guilt. And I think this is not highlighted enough, is that many people like Lakvinder Kaur were compensated to some limited degree after this by the government. But in fact, all this is implying, and by implication, this is actually proving the level of guilt of the Indian government and its involvement in this dreadful situation. This genocide that occurred that saw several thousand, tens of thousands of men, women and children tortured and murdered. And yeah, okay, great, there's a bit of compensation there. But firstly, as I said, it acknowledges the guilt of the Indian government, which in turn then implies, well, why then, if you are acknowledging guilt in 1984 and 1985, why then has it taken all these years to bring the guilty as charged to trial? Why are you still burying and hiding the evidence? Why are you making it so difficult to bring the guilty to justice? And it again, it's the hypocrisy that sits between the lines here. Is that clearly in 1985 the government says, yes, okay, we acknowledge what happened, but then why did you spend nearly 40 years trying to protect those who were in the government who were guilty of this? It's one thing handing out compensation, but the real compensation was bringing people like Tytler to trial in the 1980s because they were well known. There were enough people who pointed fingers at these people, at these individuals. They were eyewitnesses. They saw these individuals driving around, whipping up the mobs. They saw these individuals handing out the lists of addresses of Sikh families in the region. They saw the mobs, they saw these Congress MPs, they saw the higher functionaries of the Congress party driving around, handing out rods and sticks and weapons and petrol bombs and things, and instructing the mobs what to do, where to go, where to find these people. So why then were they protected for so many years? Why has it taken all these years for Lakvinder Kaur and people like her to finally bring these people to justice, to fight, to dig up the evidence? It's, again, it's appalling, and it's such a stain on India's history. It is a stain on India's claim to be a democracy. It is a stain on India trying to claim that it follows the rule of law. It's horrifying, I have to say. And then we start talking about a bit of legal speak here. On August the 30th, the court ordered the framing of charges against Tytler for the offences of murder, abetment, rioting, promoting enmity between groups, and being part of an unlawful assembly. So those are the charges that he's now facing. The court had said that the material brought on record showed prima facie, that's on the face of it, that the accused was a member of an unlawful assembly of persons at the Gurdwara in that locality, etc., etc. Now, and again, this is a very tiny snapshot of those events of November 1984. This is just one person facing a few charges and facing just one victim's wife across a courtroom. You think of the tens of thousands of victims and then, therefore, their extended families. So there are hundreds of thousands of Sikh families out there, still alive, still bearing the scars of family members who were murdered and tortured, who were raped, who were gang raped, children who were literally tortured and murdered in front of their families. Those members of the families are still alive who remember these things. So this is a tiny snapshot, and it's taken all these years to bring this one person to jail. There is a whole army of people out there who had a hand in this genocide, who still walk around, who still live a peaceful life, whilst thousands of Punjabi Sikhs still bear the scars, still waiting for justice. James, I still think this is a tragic story that still has no end, and we still struggle to see any justice.
Absolutely. And to imagine the horrific thoughts and dreams or nightmares that people still live with today from this. And, you know, the old saying that justice delayed is justice denied. And that's exactly what's happened, is that justice has been denied to the hundreds of thousands of victims that lived through it, but also through generational victimization. It is just horrific. And for these ladies to follow through and to be pushing to make sure that this one individual is prosecuted, you know, it just speaks volumes to their courage, their bravery, and their tenacity. But to only have, you know, to not hold the others accountable is just sickening, Angus.
It is, and it's very easy if you're from the young generation and you're in the diaspora, you're living in Canada or the US, and you hear about these stories, and they do seem very sort of distant, but it's really, really important that these stories are kept alive, that the horror of what happened in 1984 across that whole year, and of course what followed in the 80s and 90s, those stories must be kept alive. And that each generation must pass down what actually happened, because these stories must not be forgotten, because there are still so many guilty who are walking around. India bears this on its conscience. India must never be allowed to forget what it did against the Sikh population of the Punjab during those years. And again, it's so important that these stories are recounted, kept alive, that justice is sought year after year, and that the guilty are finally brought to justice. So yeah, it's a very powerful story, and as I say, James, we must never let these stories be forgotten. Okay, let's.
It sure shows how much we take for granted our youth and our growing up in such a calm society in comparison. I mean, we just can't even fathom in our heads, the atrocities.
Indeed. So, but this is an area that we of course will keep following. We will keep talking about on a regular basis. Okay, my second story. We often talk about the Punjabi language, and many of our commenters have often commented how they are seeing this insidious agenda of the Punjabi language being slowly but surely driven out of the Punjab with a very clear agenda. It's undermining. It's a deliberate agenda to undermine the historic cultural heritage of the Sikh community. But of course there are many factors at play here. And this is an article, actually, it's appeared on the Satellite TV News website. This is an article actually analysing in quite a lot of depth of what is going on with the Punjabi language, how the pros and cons of what's happening, and the balancing of how it is growing in some areas but it is declining in others. And it does give quite an interesting balanced view of what is happening with the language. So I'll quickly whip through this just to give you an idea. Now, despite being a language that is spoken by a considerable large part of the world, Punjabi is, of course, as we talk about regularly, facing an existential crisis in the region where it is the mother tongue. Punjabi, as it turns out, is the 10th most spoken language in the world. It's spoken by around some 100 million people. Now, of course, the most widely spoken language is Chinese. I think that's Mandarin, which is spoken by about 1.2 billion people. Second most spoken language is Spanish, spoken by about 400 million. Third is, of course, English, by about 360 million. And then fourth is Hindi, unsurprisingly, because, of course, the main language of India. And then, as I said, Punjabi by about 100 million. So 30 million speakers of Punjabi reside in Punjab and various other states of India. In Pakistan-administered Punjab, the population of the Punjabi-speaking community is some 70 million. So there are a lot of Punjabi speakers on the Pakistan side of the border. Punjabi-loving activists and scholars are very concerned, unsurprisingly, over this slow death owing to, of course, the dominance of Hindi and Urdu in Pakistan. Hindi and Urdu words are now replacing Punjabi words very slowly but gradually because, of course, both languages are the state languages in the Indian subcontinent. Although Punjabi is the mother tongue of the Punjabis, irrespective of their faith, caste and creed, Sikhs have always shown special attachment towards this language, of course, because it is so inherent in their culture. And the biggest reason, unsurprisingly, is the Guru Granth Sahib. And it was created by Guru Saiban in Gurmukhi, the script developed by the second Guru, Sri Guru Angus Sahib, especially for this particular language. All the scriptures of the Sikhs were also authored in Gurmukhi. However, it's been seen that a large section of Sikhs are also under the influence of Hindi and English. This section has actually stopped speaking pure Punjabi. And it's interesting, it turns out there's a bit of a class divide here. This is not a caste divide as such, it's more of a class divide. The privileged section of the Sikhs, a considerable part of which tends to settle in urban areas, has a tendency either to speak Hindi, Punjabi mixed language, English Punjabi mixed language, or Hindi alone. Whilst communicating, they, like other Punjabis, feel a sort of pride to speak words of Hindi and English. And I've noticed this myself when I've been travelling around the region like that. There is almost a sort of psychological snobbery about being able to insert English words into the language, and of course Hindi language. It's sort of seen as almost being sophisticated. And this actually, ironically, this isn't restricted just to India. I've noticed it in European countries, for example, when I've mixed in multilingual. I've had conversations in groups of many multilingual parties who might speak Italian, French, German, English, and quite often the conversation will rotate around in English, but it's also seen as almost sophisticated to drop in words of English in that conversation. And again, I think this is almost it's almost an unconscious act that's happening here in India, and in particular across the Punjab, where, shall we say, the more upper class Punjabis, and I'm interested in my audience's opinion on this, but I sort of get it. I understand what's happening here. It's where the more upper class and socially aspirational, shall we call it, Punjabis, I think it's quite it's more sophisticated to throw in a bit of Hindi and a bit of English in there. But of course, what it's doing, it's now diluting the pure Punjabi language. And of course, we do see, and this is reflected not just across India, but other parts of the world as well. There is a divide between the urban areas and the country, the rural areas. And again, this is very much reflective across the world, is the urban areas tend to be that slightly wealthier parts of society. The rural countryside areas tend to be slightly poorer areas. So of course, then you get this language divide reflected here. And this article reflects this as well. The children in the parts of the cities and towns are seen speaking Hindi. Middle-class Sikhs study in the private schools, which are affiliated to the Central Board of Secondary Education, the CBSE, New Delhi, and Indian Certificate of Secondary Education, ICSE. The students have to study in English. So, except for a few schools run by the Sikh organisations, including the Chief Khalsa Diwan and Shiromani Gurdwara Parbandhak Committee, the SGPC, all these schools give importance to Hindi after English. The medium of instruction is also in English and Hindu. Punjabi is nowhere. Incidents of punishing students for speaking Punjabi in mutual communications amongst the students take place often. So here we're seeing in the private schools, and this is where, of course, the middle class and upwards Punjabis send their children. The main language in the private schools, there's no Punjabi spoken, it's either Hindi or English. And of course, it's the middle class that then lead on to the higher careers, the careers in senior administration, in the government, in the professions, law or whatever, in medicine. It's these who actually then are not who are not educated in Punjabi. They're speaking English and Hindi almost by default, and they are going into the more senior professions of life. Now, interestingly, in the rural areas, the Sikh people are not under the influence of Hindi-speaking people, even as their children study in CBSE and ICSE affiliated schools. All the people in the villages still speak Punjabi. Punjabi Sikhs, Ravidazia Sikhs and Ramdazia Sikhs are not able to get their children to study in private schools because they can't afford it. Hindi language doesn't enter their homes. Their children study in the government schools where special efforts are made by the Education Department of Punjab to promote Punjabi and keep it alive. They are familiar with the Punjabi phrases and idioms which are necessary for the existence of the language. On the other hand, the children who study in the private schools, especially in the cities, remain malnourished in terms of learning Punjabi. Sikhs who live in remote areas, such as the border belt, catchment areas of river and hilly areas, are keeping the dialects of the Punjabi language alive in its purest form. Otherwise, Punjabi dialects like Majhi, Doabi, Malwai, Pawandi, Pahari, etc. have almost died, especially in urban areas. So, yeah, it's a complex situation, James. We've often talked about this conspiratorial agenda of this deliberate attempt by New Delhi and the Hindus, and particularly the RSS, BJP, to drive out the Punjabi language as an attack on the Sikh culture. But on the plus side, it does seem that certainly in the rural areas, that Punjabi is alive and well. It is kept alive by the families. But, excuse me, where families, the upper class and middle class families, are sending their children to private school, again, this is where the Hindus have a lot more power, is that they are now ensuring that the next generation of India's leaders, and of course Punjab's leaders, are educated in Hindi and English. So there is an agenda there, James. It's sad, of course, to see Punjabi disappear, certainly from the higher echelons of Indian society.
Absolutely, Angus, and I'd love to hear from our viewers because I know in Canada we've got approximately 960,000 Punjabi citizens here or residents combined, and that's about 2.6% of the Canadian population. So I'd really love to hear back from those people and our viewers to find out if they're getting resistance from the younger generation about having to learn English and Punjabi, and if you feel that that's being lost in the transition as well. So I would just love to hear back on that.
Yeah, so in our audience, if you've got any comments on this, do let us know, because we are very interested to know your opinion on this. Because as I say, it is a complex issue, but there is an agenda at play. So, but I would actually, and also contrast, here in the UK, for example, we have the Welsh language spoken by many Indigenous Welsh people who also speak English, and likewise Gaelic in the northern parts of Scotland. And it is the government, ironically, it's the other way around. It's the government that are ensuring that schools, the school curricula, have to have the Welsh language and the Gaelic language spoken to at least a certain percentage within local schools. So it is the government that is deliberately keeping this culture alive. They recognise the value of the culture. Compare that, of course, to India, which is doing quite the opposite, where India is trying deliberately to drive out these separate individual elements of culture, the heritage of these diverse parts of society. It's very sad. It'd be very sad to lose these things like this. Okay, James, let's move on to the comments section because, of course, we are running out of time as always. Okay, and yes, Divinajit Singh's discussion, my podcast, where we talked at great length about Khalistan and the first steps that are put in place to bring Khalistan about and the momentum that's now gathering at governmental level. Well, one of our regular anti-Khalistan critics, Averdi, waded in, unsurprisingly, and said, "Keep dreaming, it's free." Well, indeed, it's not just a dream, but RKS 53 replied, and there were many responses to this, many of which actually are unrepeatable, but I'll put a few in here. Many times dreams come true. Well, absolutely, this dream is coming true. I hate to say this, Mr. or Mrs. or whoever you happen to be, Averdi, but things are afoot, things are moving, and watch that podcast if you don't believe me. And Fateh Singh says, the Indian establishment, well, there's a few rude parts here, but it then goes on to say, the establishment of an independent Sikh state, Khalistan, in the Punjab region of South Asia and the world map is definite in the very near future, including the disintegration of India into 14 other happy independent countries. Even the Indians are saying India will disintegrate. Well, I mean, I couldn't say this better, is that there are, as we regularly report, James, there are many parts of India that are absolutely rattling their windows to say we want to break free. And it's likely, as we keep saying, that once Khalistan happens, and it is likely that this could happen sooner than we realise, once Khalistan breaks free, is that many other regions around India are going to say, well, look, if Khalistan can have it, why can't we? So, James, we often talk about the dominoes that will fall, don't we?
Absolutely, and I assume he's referring to falling asleep and dreaming in the bathtub with the water running there.
Exactly, but this is a dream that is happening. And Averdi responds with, well, actually, this is I would say a slightly weak response, because they say India may well disintegrate into whatever number of states. However, the Punjab will remain Punjab. No one's going to change the name. Keep dreaming and looting the dumb Sikhs into giving donations for the Khalistani cause. Well, Punjab will remain Punjab. Yes, it will remain Punjab, but it will be renamed Khalistan, because the whole point of self-determination, well, the clue is in the definition, self-determination. It has the right. It can call itself the Punjab and continue to call itself the Punjab, or it has the right to rename itself Khalistan, which of course is likely what it will be. But it is also quite likely, being a democracy, which is clearly an alien term to Averdi, it is likely there could even be a referendum to let the people of the Punjab decide what will our new country be called. And of course it is likely to be Khalistan, James, is it not?
Well, it depends. You know, I I'm kind of tossing a coin on that one, Angus, just because of the historical part of the name of Punjab as well, right? So it's just carries so much historical weight. But I see both sides of it, so it's hard to say.
Indeed, and if you are in our audience, you have any other thoughts, any other names for Khalistan, let us know. But I think Khalistan is the name that has a huge historic resonance, so I think it's likely that will be the one. Okay, Gurpreet Chima refers to this story. This was in Denver airport, where a Sikh was demanded by security to remove his turban, and he actually refused, unsurprisingly. But Gurpreet adds in quite an interesting angle to this story. And this again, James, refers to what we've been talking about law enforcement being infiltrated by the RSS, and the RSS having this very powerful agenda to educate law enforcement and many public bodies about the Indian narrative and the anti-Sikh narrative. So Gurpreet says, actually, this person wonders if this was a deliberate tactic on behalf of the security services at the airport, because they had in turn been educated by the RSS that yes, you should ensure that all Sikhs remove their turbans, because they know full well how offensive that is to Sikhs. So James, I think that's quite an interesting angle on that story.
Yeah, and just the disrespect, and again, it is about the learning lesson as well, that people are learning. But in this day and age, I still just can't believe that anybody in a position, whether it's at the airport, train station, wherever, I just can't fathom that they don't understand the significance of the turban, and to just disrespect someone in that way. So.
Indeed. Tarnok Sahota, a Hollywood film on Khalistan is an excellent idea. Well, James, I think we've made our thoughts on that one very clear.
I agree, Angus, and I think it'd be even better a Hollywood North production here in Canada.
Well, I'm trying to think of
sound stages and studios here to produce the Hollywood magic.
I'm trying to think of the Khalistan equivalent of Hollywood, Khalistanwood, or whatever we want to call it. But I'm sure the Khalistan nation will have its own burgeoning film industry once it's established.
That's so right. It'll be a spin-off of Bollywood to the best degree.
Amritsar Wood or Chandigarh Wood or something. We shall see. Give us your suggestions. Jat Gabru says, Sikhs and Americans are natural allies with the same views. The BJP in India often compare Sikhs to Americans. Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I think and it absolutely highlights the one simple fundamental fact that the Sikh philosophy is based on essentially a democratic, moralistic point of view of philosophy. And of course, America, the whole of the West, is built on democracy. So of course we're natural allies. India has struggled with the concept, as we often talk about. Khalistan, as we often talk about, will be built on the Sikh version of democracy, a very unique version of it. And watch my podcast with Debindajit to understand the Panj Padani concept, which is a fabulous concept. Yeah, absolutely. I think that this point is very clear, and I couldn't disagree with it, James.
Absolutely, and I just like to watch the Indian government squirm. So when they start comparing to the Sikhs to Americans, and then they want all the Americans to invest. So
Well, I also think it's no coincidence.
They want the American money, but they don't want the lifestyle, I guess.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And I think it's no coincidence that the Sikh diaspora has fled to countries like the US, Canada, and the UK and Australia, because of course, yeah, their philosophies are the same. They believe in democracy. Yeah, I think it's unsurprising the BJP don't like it. Right, I had to put this on. This is one of my favourite responses. APS Rosary, we've talked about this comment before. Go to India to protest with Khalistan. Why do it in the US, you cowards? Well, Balraj Bra, I love this comment, and I put it up because it's one of my favourite comments. No worries, we're on it. Beautifully put. We are on it. The Khalistan movement are certainly on it, APS Rosary. It's happening, and don't worry, Khalistan is coming, and it is coming to Khalistan itself. So, well said, Balraj Bra.
Yeah.
Right, final set of comments to wrap up the show.
I love it.
Now, I did my podcast with Jagtar Singh Chauhan's brother, Gurpreet. And it's been an interesting one, this. And I've been monitoring this, and I mentioned this the other day, is that we talk about shadow banning. Now, for some reason, this podcast has had one of the lowest levels of views of any of our videos in months. And it's I have absolutely no doubt, and this story is a big story. This interview is a big interview. Of course, we cover an awful lot of ground. It is of a lot of interest to a large part of our audience, and yet it remains one of our lowest viewed videos. Now, you work it out. I've worked it out. I think it's pretty clear what's going on. The hashtag Jaggy was very visible. It was in the comment section as well, the hashtag Jaggy. I have absolutely no doubt that there are forces afoot keeping this video from being viewed by a wider audience. And I don't think it's just coming from India, this one, James. It's very likely, because of course this is a very uncomfortable subject for the British establishment. So I think it's very likely, James, that there are a few hidden hands at play here from the British side.
Wouldn't surprise me, Angus. It is a very polarizing issue, and inside and outside of India. So yeah, as I said, it wouldn't surprise me at all if that was the case.
Yeah, and of course, Gurpreet was very diplomatic in his criticisms of the British government, but he certainly did make it very clear the British government are really to blame for a very appalling situation over the imprisonment of Jaggy. And we've often highlighted the abject failure of the British government. Deliberate, we don't know, but certainly we often refer to this hidden relationship between the British establishment and the Indian establishment. So yeah, as I said, I do suspect there is a lot of things going on behind the scenes with this video. I have no doubt it is being shadow banned. I think so. I think it's, as it said, and ironically, the thumbnail for this one was "We are fighting two governments." And indeed, trying to get this video out there on YouTube, I think we are fighting two governments, as it turns out, very ironically. Now, Hardar Singh, thank you for your comment, and thanks for inviting Gurpreet onto the programme. It was an absolute pleasure to have Gurpreet. He needs to get his voice out there. He needs to get this message of what's happened to his brother, this appalling situation of his brother who's been imprisoned for nearly 7 years, is up to his 137th trial now, where the Indian government, again, supposedly following the rule of law, but as Gurpreet has said, this trial at the current rate will last over 40 years. Even if he's found innocent, this trial will last over 40 years at the current rate. And as he pointed out in his interview, in our discussion, he said he knows what the Indian government are up to. They don't care whether he's guilty or innocent. They are sending a message to anyone. You take us on, you highlight the appalling atrocities, as Jagtar did of the 1980s, where the Indian government and the police, the Indian police, Punjabi police, murdered in cold blood tens, if not hundreds of thousands of young Sikh men. If you highlight that fact, this is what happens to you. We'll put you in prison and you will never, ever come out. That's the message coming from India. And Gurpreet has no doubt that's why Jaggy still remains in prison. It's a travesty of justice, what's going on there. And Hat B follows up with absolutely, Jagtar needs to be released immediately. Of course he does. Any right-minded, decent human being on this planet knows that Jaggy should be released immediately. And you rightly point out, let's see if David Lammy, he's the Foreign Secretary, the British Foreign Secretary at the moment, if he would stay quiet, if he had to spend 24 hours in an Indian jail. Yeah, exactly. Jaggy's been stuck there for 7 years. His family have suffered enough. The UK needs to get him back now. No trade deal is worth a Sikh life for freedom. Absolutely. This is all about, and again, it comes back to, and again, we bring this up in the interview, is it human rights or is it a trade deal? It's very clear what the British government has seen as a priority. It's a trade deal, not human rights. It's the hypocrisy of the British government that we hold up to account regularly. Stop Indian terrorist state terrorising Sikhs all over the world. Why can't they see that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere? Good point to finish on this, James, is that the British government needs to realise that injustice in India is a threat to justice everywhere. Yet, what is the British government doing about it? At least, James, we see the Canadian government standing up for human rights. We don't see it here in the UK.
Exactly. And as far as the US government right now, they're still on a holding pattern. They refuse to speak out against the India government until the trial of Gupta is done. But they have very clearly stated that they will be handling that issue once the trial's over because they don't want to interfere with that. So it'll be interesting to see how much they have to say, or if they just let sleeping dogs lie, as they say. Once the trial's over, try to push past that and move to the trade.
Indeed, there are a lot of balls in the air at the moment. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. And of course, we at Perspectives will hopefully keep a very close eye on it and bring you the news as and when it unfolds. But unfortunately, we must finish on that point. Don't forget to keep those comments coming in. We do appreciate them. Thank you for all your lovely comments. There have been lots of wonderfully complimentary comments, which James and I really do appreciate. So thank you very much indeed for those. Even if we don't acknowledge them here in this section, we do love receiving those. Thank you, of course, for your very educational comments and your comments pointing out things that we might have missed. And of course, we love the critical comments. Keep those coming as well. They're always good for a discussion point as well. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satellitetv.com, as many of you have done. Thanks very much indeed for those. But in the meantime, we must wrap up Perspectives for another day. It is a goodbye from me, and it is a goodbye from James.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe and excuse the noise during the show. Angus is still having his new studio installed. I'm jealous, but that's the bit of noise and construction sounds you hear in the background. So just work with us. Angus is very excited about the new studio, and we'll be excited to see it when it's done.
Indeed, and hopefully we'll be able to unfold that in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, thanks for watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.